Most self-help gurus tell you that your ultimate goal is happiness, peace, and self-actualization. They are lying to you. Fyodor Dostoevsky looked into the deepest, darkest basement of the human psyche and discovered a terrifying truth. Human beings do not want happiness. In fact, we are hardwired to deliberately sabotage our own lives just to prove we can. We are addicted to suffering, obsessed with chaos, and completely terrified of absolute freedom. If you've ever felt an unexplainable urge to ruin a good relationship, smash a perfect routine, or dive headfirst into self-destruction, you aren't broken, you are exactly what Dostoevsky warned us about. This isn't a passive philosophical lecture. It is an unfiltered psychological autopsy of your darkest impulses. Over the next 4 chapters, we are going to strip away the polite illusions of modern psychology, bypass your ego, and confront the grotesque, beautiful reality of what it actually means to be human. By the time the sun comes up, you will no longer trust your own mind. We like to think of ourselves as smart, logical creatures. Every modern self-help book, productivity app, and corporate seminar is built on a single comforting lie. If you just give people the right data, the right tools, and a clear path to happiness, they will take it. We treat the human brain like an iPhone app if it glitches. You just need a software update, a better morning routine, or a new habit tracker. But over a century ago, Fyodor Dostoevsky looked into the deepest, darkest corner of the human heart and realized something that modern psychology is still terrified to admit. Humans are not logical. We do not want a smooth, perfect, predictable life. In fact, if you give a human being everything they ever dreamed of, they will intentionally smash it to pieces just to see what happens. Dostoevsky introduces us to this terrifying reality through a character known simply as the Underground Man. He is a bitter, hyper-intelligent, retired government clerk living in a miserable basement apartment. He is a man who spends his entire day overthinking every single interaction he has ever had, turning small insults into massive mental wars. He is isolated, angry, and physically sick. But the most alarming part about him is that he chooses to be this way. He doesn't want to get better. He takes a twisted, disgusting pleasure in his own misery. The Underground Man is Dostoevsky's weapon against the idea of rational design. During the 19th century, a wave of thinkers believed that science, mathematics, and logic could fix humanity. They believed that if we could map out human behavior perfectly, we could build a utopia, a place where everyone is fed, everyone is happy, and everyone acts in their own best interest. They called this perfect future society the Crystal Palace. Dostoevsky looked at this beautiful, shiny vision of a perfect world and felt a deep, instinctive horror. He knew that the moment you turn the world into a perfect mathematical equation, you kill the one thing that makes us human, our freedom. If science can predict exactly what you will eat for breakfast, exactly who you will fall in love with, and exactly how much money you will make, then you are no longer a living being. You are a cog in a machine. You are a key on a piano being played by someone else. This is where the psychological concept of reactive autonomy comes into play. When humans feel like their control over their own life is being threatened, even if that threat comes in the form of a perfect, peaceful utopia, they will violently push back. We would rather choose to suffer on our own terms than be forced to be happy on someone else's terms. Think about your own life. Have you ever had a moment where everything was going perfectly? Your career was steady, your relationship was healthy, your daily routine was flawless. And then, out of absolutely nowhere, an unexplainable urge crept up from the basement of your mind. You picked a fight with your partner over something stupid. You stayed up until 4 in the morning scrolling on your phone when you had a massive meeting the next day. You skipped the gym, ate junk food, and actively sabotaged your own progress. The standard self-help industry calls this a lack of discipline. They tell you that you just need more willpower, but Dostoevsky tells you the truth. You did it on purpose. You did it because your soul was suffocating under the weight of predictability. You did it to prove to yourself that you are still the one driving the car, even if you are driving it straight into a ditch. The twisted pleasure of misery. To understand the psychology of self-sabotage, we have to look at one of the most uncomfortable concepts Dostoevsky ever proposed: the idea that human beings can find intense, genuine pleasure in their own suffering. This sounds completely backward. From an evolutionary standpoint, We are supposed to run away from pain and chase pleasure. We avoid burning our hands on hot stoves, and we seek out food, comfort, and companionship. But human psychology is not a simple equation. It is a messy, paradoxical labyrinth. The underground man explicitly states that he finds enjoyment in a toothache. He describes how a person with a severe toothache will lie awake at night, groaning out loud, not just because it hurts, but because they want everyone else in the house to hear how much it hurts. The groan becomes a performance. It becomes a way of spreading the misery, of manipulating the environment, of making sure that no one else gets to enjoy their peaceful sleep while the sufferer is awake. There is a deep, toxic sense of power in that. This is what modern psychology refers to as secondary gain. Sometimes, being miserable offers a greater psychological reward than being happy. When you are a victim, when you are broken, when everything is going wrong, you are suddenly relieved of responsibility. You don't have to try anymore. You don't have to risk failure because you have already failed. Furthermore, your suffering gives you a twisted sense of uniqueness. You can look at the happy, normal people walking down the street and think to yourself, they are so simple, so blind. They don't understand the deep, profound pain that I carry. In America's hyper-competitive culture, we see this play out constantly in the form of competitive exhaustion. People brag about how little sleep they got, how stressed they are, how close they are to a total mental breakdown. We wear our burnout like a badge of honor. Why? Because suffering makes us feel important. It makes us feel noticed. Dostoevsky takes this a step further. He argues that we don't just endure suffering for a secondary gain, we actively crave the sensation of hitting rock bottom. There is a strange, intoxicating freedom in total collapse. When everything is already ruined, the anxiety of trying to keep things together completely vanishes. The pressure is off. You can finally breathe, even if the air is full of smoke. This is the psychological trap of the basement. The underground man stays in his basement because it is safe. Out there, in the real world, if he tries to succeed, he might get rejected. If he tries to love, he might get his heart broken. If he tries to be a good person, he might fail. But in the basement, surrounded by his own spite and bitterness, he is the absolute king. He can judge the entire world from his dark corner without ever having to risk being judged himself. The terror of absolute free will. The most terrifying thing about being human is not that we are weak, but that we are free. We like to blame our parents, our genes, our bosses, and our economic systems for our problems. We love to build cages of excuses around ourselves, because as long as we are in a cage, we don't have to worry about where we are walking. Dostoevsky cuts through all these excuses. He shows us that when you strip away all the societal pressures and rules, you are left standing face to face with a massive, terrifying void of absolute choice. The underground man is a victim of hyperconsciousness. He thinks so much, analyzes so much, and sees so many angles to every single problem that he becomes completely paralyzed. If someone insults him, a normal person might get angry and punch them, or simply walk away. But the underground man can't do that. He stops and thinks, why did he insult me? Was it my fault? Is he right? If I hit him, what does that say about me? If I forgive him, am I just being a coward? Because he sees every single perspective, he loses the ability to take any real action. He becomes a spectator in his own life, watching himself think about acting while never actually doing anything. This is what we call analysis paralysis, taken to an existential extreme. To escape this mental prison, humans will look for any authority, any ideology, or any distraction that promises to take away their freedom of choice. We want someone else to give us the answers. This is why people join extreme political movements, why they blindly follow cult-like internet personalities, and why they look for rigid, one-size-fits-all rules for how to live their lives. It is incredibly exhausting to wake up every single morning and realize that you, and you alone, are responsible for the meaning and outcome of your existence. When we refuse to take responsibility for that freedom, we fall into what philosophers call bad faith. We pretend we don't have choices when we actually do. We say things like, I have to stay at this miserable job, or I have no choice but to stay in this toxic relationship. But Dostoevsky reminds us that you always have a choice. Even if the choices are terrifying, even if the alternative is walking away into the unknown, you are choosing your current misery every single second you remain in it. The underground man chooses his spite. He chooses his isolation. He knows exactly how pathetic he looks, and he knows exactly how much better his life could be if he just stepped out of his basement and connected with another human being. But he doesn't do it. Why? Because choosing to change requires a level of courage that most people simply do not possess. It is much easier to sit in the dark, complain about the world, and sabotage your own potential than it is to stand up, take responsibility, and risk the pain of growth. The failure of the smartest person in the room. There is a dangerous myth in modern society that intelligence is a shield against psychological ruin. We assume that if someone reads enough books, gets a high enough degree, or possesses a brilliant intellect, they will automatically have their life figured out. We think smart people are immune to stupid mistakes. Dostoevsky completely dismantles this illusion. The underground man is easily the most intelligent character in his social circle. He is deeply read, intellectually sharp, and capable of analyzing human nature with poetic precision. Yet, his life is a complete and utter train wreck. His intelligence doesn't save him. It is the very engine that drives his self-destruction. When you are highly intelligent, your mind becomes incredibly skilled at creating sophisticated rationalizations for your worst behaviors. If you are lazy, your brain won't just say, "I don't feel like working." It will construct a brilliant philosophical argument about how capitalism is inherently exploitative, how work is a social construct, and how your inaction is actually a profound form of political protest. If you are terrified of intimacy, your mind won't admit, "I'm scared of getting hurt." Instead, it will convince you that human connections are inherently transactional, that everyone leaves eventually, and that you are simply too intellectually advanced to engage in shallow, emotional games. This creates a massive barrier to genuine self-awareness. The underground man is stuck in a loop of constant self-observation. He knows he is being petty, he knows he is being mean, and he knows he is destroying his own chances at happiness. But instead of changing, he simply congratulates himself on how well he understands his own flaws. He mistakes the awareness of his problem for the solution to his problem. We see this exact psychological trap all over social media today. There is an entire subculture of people who can list every single one of their psychological diagnoses, trauma responses, and attachment styles with textbook accuracy. They can talk for hours about their coping mechanisms and their emotional wounds. But if you look at their actual lives, nothing changes. They are using the language of psychology not to heal, but to build a more sophisticated cage for themselves. They are weaponizing their intellect to justify staying exactly where they are. Dostoevsky's warning is clear. Raw intelligence without a moral anchor, without humility, and without the willingness to take action is a psychological curse. It turns your mind into a hall of mirrors, where every exit just leads you back to your own ego. The smartest person in the room is often the most blind, because they are too busy looking at their own thoughts to see the reality right in front of their face. Spite is a twisted form of life. To truly wrap your head around Dostoevsky's psychology, you have to look at the raw energy that fuels self-sabotage. Spite. In the very first line of Notes from Underground, the main character states, "I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man. I am an unattractive man." Spite is a fascinating emotion because it completely violates the laws of self-preservation. When you act out of spite, you are entirely willing to hurt yourself, as long as it causes some amount of discomfort, inconvenience, or guilt to someone else. It is the psychological equivalent of drinking poison and waiting for your enemy to die. Why would anyone operate on this level? Because spite is a warped, desperate way of screaming at the universe, "I exist." Think about a small child who doesn't get the toy they want. They might throw a massive tantrum, scream, cry, and intentionally smash their favorite toy on the ground. From a logical perspective, this makes no sense. The child loved that toy. By breaking it, they are only punishing themselves. But from a psychological perspective, it makes perfect sense. The child is saying, "If I cannot control my world, if I cannot have what I want, then I will exercise the only power I have left, the power to destroy." As adults, we don't outgrow this behavior. We just make it quieter and more passive-aggressive. Consider a toxic workplace. An employee feels unappreciated, ignored, and passed over for a promotion by a bad manager. Instead of talking about it or looking for a new job, They might start performing poorly on purpose. They slow down their work, miss deadlines, and let important projects slip through the cracks. They know this behavior could get them fired. They know it damages their professional reputation. But the petty thrill of making their manager look bad, the satisfaction of throwing a wrench into the company machine, is a feeling they cannot resist. Spite is the ultimate rebellion against being managed, optimized, and controlled. In a world that is constantly trying to smooth out your rough edges, a world that demands you be efficient, polite, and cooperative at all times, being spiteful is a way of reclaiming your messy humanity. It is ugly, it is destructive, but it is intensely alive. The underground man realizes that a completely rational world leaves no room for passion. If you remove all the friction, all the conflict, and all the irrational desires from human life, you are left with a flat, grey wasteland. We need a little bit of dirt, a little bit of chaos, and a little bit of madness to feel real. Self-sabotage is our subconscious mind's way of kicking up dust when the air gets too clean to breathe. The relentless need for chaos. There is a beautiful, terrifying passage where Dostoevsky writes that man is a creature who loves to build and create, but is also passionately fond of destruction and chaos. We are obsessed with the process of striving for a goal, but the moment we achieve it, we become deeply uneasy. Think about the classic narrative of a Hollywood movie or a fairy tale. It always ends at the wedding, the victory, or the moment the hero saves the day. The screen fades to black, and we assume they lived happily ever after. But if the movie kept rolling for another 5 years, what would we see? We would see the hero getting bored. We would see them arguing over the dishes. We would see them looking out the window, wondering if this is all there is to life. We are hardwired for the struggle, not the settlement. When we achieve complete stability, a quiet panic sets in. The mind, which evolved to solve problems, fight threats, and navigate danger, suddenly has nothing to do. And an underemployed mind will always start manufacturing threats from within. This is why people who win the lottery often end up completely bankrupt and miserable just a few years later. This is why celebrities who have all the fame, money, and adoration in the world still end up destroying their lives with addiction and public scandals. It isn't just that they made bad choices. It is that their environment became so comfortable that their subconscious mind practically demanded a crisis to restore a sense of gravity to their existence. Dostoevsky argues that we love chaos because chaos is the only time we are fully awake. When everything is organized and safe, we fall into a psychological sleep. We go through the motions. We become predictable. But when everything hits the fan, when our lives are falling apart, every single sense is dialed up to 11. We feel the adrenaline, we feel the stakes, and we feel the weight of every single decision. This is the hidden engine behind so much of our self-destructive behavior. We don't crash our lives because we want to die. We crash our lives because we are desperate to feel alive. We create problems so that we can have the satisfaction of trying to solve them. We blow up our relationships so that we can feel the intense, dramatic rush of heartbreak and reconciliation. We are addicted to the drama of our own survival. The Meeting with Liza, a psychology of cruelty. To see Dostoevsky's psychological theories play out in a raw human narrative, we have to look at the second half of Notes from Underground, where the underground man leaves his basement and interacts with a young woman named Liza. Liza is a vulnerable, impoverished young woman who has been forced into prostitution to survive. The underground man meets her in a brothel, and instead of just treating her like everyone else does, he decides to play an intellectual game with her. He uses his advanced vocabulary and his sharp insights to paint a vivid, terrifying picture of her future. He tells her how she will lose her beauty, how she will get sick, how she will be discarded like trash by the owners of the house, and how no one will come to her funeral. He speaks with such intense emotional weight that Liza breaks down into a state of total, weeping despair. The underground man watches this collapse and feels an incredible wave of psychological power. He has managed to bypass her defenses and completely break her spirit. He gives her his address and tells her to come see him. But when Liza actually shows up at his miserable basement apartment a few days later, the psychological dynamic completely shifts. She doesn't see a brilliant, powerful philosopher. She sees a poor, pathetic, frantic man living in filth, arguing with his servant over money. She sees his vulnerability, his poverty, and his shame. Instead of mocking him, instead of taking revenge, Liza reacts with pure, unconditional love and compassion. She walks over to him and throws her arms around him. In any standard story, this would be the moment of redemption. The lonely, bitter man is saved by the love of a good woman. The light breaks into the basement, and he is healed. But Dostoevsky is not a standard writer, and human psychology is not a Disney movie. The moment the underground man feels Liza's genuine love and pity, his ego experiences a massive, violent shock. He realizes that she is the strong one, and he is the weak one. Her capacity for love has exposed his complete emotional bankruptcy. He cannot handle the vulnerability of being loved. He cannot tolerate the idea that someone else has power over his emotions. So, what does he do? He lashes out with horrific, calculated cruelty. He tells her straight to her face that he was just laughing at her when he spoke to her at the brothel. He tells her that he doesn't care about her at all, and that he only wanted power over her. He insults her, humiliates her, and hands her a piece of money as if she was still just a commodity in a shop, completely crushing her dignity. Liza runs out of his apartment into the snow, and she never returns. This is perhaps the most profound psychological insight in the entire book. Self-sabotage doesn't just mean ruining your goals or your health. It means violently rejecting the very things your soul craves the most. When a person has been stuck in the basement of isolation and self-loathing for too long, love does not feel like a gift. It feels like an attack. It feels like an existential threat to the identity they have built. If you believe you are unlovable, anyone who shows you love must either be stupid or they must have a hidden motive. To protect your fragile, broken ego, you will destroy the relationship before they can have the chance to leave you. The underground man spends the rest of his life obsessing over that afternoon. He runs out into the snow after her, but it is too late. He is left entirely alone in his dark room, consumed by guilt, spite, and regret. He had a golden ticket out of his hell, and he threw it away on purpose, just to protect his pride, escaping the basement. So, where does this leave us? Is Dostoevsky just trying to drag us into a state of permanent depression? Is his philosophy just a black hole of hopelessness? Not at all. Dostoevsky is doing something much more valuable than offering cheap, optimistic comfort. He is giving us an accurate map of our own dark territory. You cannot fix a problem until you are willing to look at its true depth and ugliness without blinking. The first step to escaping the psychological basement is to stop lying to yourself about your motives. You have to stop pretending that your self-sabotage is just an accident, a streak of bad luck, or a temporary lack of discipline. You have to sit down in the quietest room you can find and look closely at the twisted rewards you get from staying stuck. You have to ask yourself, what am I getting out of this misery? Am I using my pain to avoid taking risks? Am I using my anger to keep people away so I don't have to be vulnerable? Am I addicted to the identity of being the broken, misunderstood victim? The moment you shine a light on those hidden motives, their power begins to dissolve. It becomes much harder to play the victim when you consciously acknowledge that you are the one writing the script. Secondly, Dostoevsky challenges us to accept the radical responsibility of our own free will. You have to realize that you are not a machine. You are not just a collection of trauma responses, genetic predispositions, and cultural programming. You are a conscious being who is choosing their path every single hour of every single day. If your life is currently an unmitigated disaster, that is a terrifying realization, but it is also the most liberating thought you will ever have. Because if you are the one who built your prison, you are also the one who holds the key to the front door. Finally, we have to recognize our deeply ingrained need for chaos and adventure, and find healthy ways to feed it. If you try to live a life that is 100% safe, 100% predictable, and 100% optimized, your subconscious mind will eventually go insane and blow everything up just to get some excitement. You have to build controlled chaos into your existence. Take risks. Step into the unknown. Take on hard challenges that have a real chance of failure. Have the difficult, terrifying conversations you've been avoiding. Push your body and your mind to their absolute limits. If you don't choose your own adventures, your shadow will choose your disasters for you. Don't let your mind become a basement of spite and regret. Step out of the dark. Take responsibility for your freedom and embrace the beautiful, messy, unpredictable madness of being fully human. We live in a culture obsessed with the idea of the disruptor. We praise the visionaries, the radicals, and the rule breakers, the individuals who look at the established boundaries of society, declare them obsolete, and rewrite the laws of human existence. We are told that greatness requires a certain level of ruthless detachment. If you want to dent the universe, you cannot be held back by the mundane anxieties of ordinary people. You have to step over the lines that keep the masses contained. But more than a century ago, Dostoevsky tracked this exact psychological ambition to its ultimate, bloody conclusion. In his masterpiece Crime and Punishment, he introduces us to Rodion Raskolnikov, a brilliant, dirt-poor, former law student living in a suffocating room that resembles a coffin. Raskolnikov is not just physically starving, his ego is starving. He is completely isolated from humanity, trapped inside his own mind, nursing a dangerously seductive intellectual virus. The Theory of the Extraordinary Man. Raskolnikov publishes an article arguing that humanity is split into two fundamentally unequal categories, the ordinary and the extraordinary. The ordinary masses are simple biological material. They exist to follow rules, preserve the species, and maintain the status quo. They are the keepers of the present. The extraordinary individuals, however, are the creators of the future. They are the Napoleons, the Caesars, the Mahomets. By their very nature, these individuals are lawbreakers. If their grand vision requires them to step over blood, to eliminate an obstacle, or to violate the most sacred moral taboos of society, they have the absolute internal right to do so. In fact, it is their duty. For the extraordinary man, crime is not a moral failing. It is a historical necessity. This is the peak of grandiose narcissism. It is a psychological defense mechanism raised to the level of high philosophy. Raskolnikov is broke, powerless, and humiliated by his material circumstances. To survive this crushing reality, his ego constructs a magnificent fantasy. What if I am not a victim of society? What if I am actually a Napoleon in disguise? What if the rules don't apply to me? To test this hypothesis, Raskolnikov decides to commit a murder. He targets an old, abusive pawnbroker who bleeds the poor of Street Petersburg dry. He rationalizes the act perfectly. The old woman is a parasite, a louse who actively harms the world. By killing her, taking her money, and using it to fund his brilliant career, he can save thousands of lives and perform countless good deeds. It is a flawless mathematical equation, one worthless life sacrificed for the elevation of a genius. But Raskolnikov does not commit the murder for the money, nor does he do it for philanthropy. He does it to answer a single, agonizing psychological question. Am I a louse like everyone else, or am I a Napoleon? Do I have the stomach to transcend the law? The fatal disconnect between ego and instinct. The tragedy of the extraordinary man illusion is that the ego can think whatever it wants, but the human nervous system keeps receipts. Raskolnikov carries out his plan. He walks into the pawnbroker's apartment and splits her skull open with an axe. But the moment the blood hits the floor, his grand philosophical framework completely shatters. Unexpectedly, the pawnbroker's gentle, mentally disabled half-sister, Lizaveta, walks into the room. Trapped by panic, Raskolnikov is forced to murder her too. The ideological crime, the targeted elimination of a social parasite, instantly degenerates into a sloppy, chaotic, desperate slaughter of an innocent bystander. This is where Dostoevsky's forensic psychological genius begins. In modern cinema and true crime documentaries, we are fascinated by the archetype of the cold, calculated sociopath, the criminal genius who operates with a low heart rate and perfect tactical precision. Raskolnikov discovers that he is absolutely not a sociopath. He thought he was a cold machine of pure intellect, but he finds out he is made of flesh, blood, and a deeply hardwired moral instinct. Immediately after the murder, Raskolnikov's psychological collapse manifests as a violent physical illness. This is what modern psychiatry calls somatization, the process where psychological trauma, guilt, and terror break through mental defenses and express themselves directly through bodily symptoms. He falls into a delirious fever. He sleeps for days, drifting in and out of horrific nightmares. His heart pounds erratically, his limbs shake, and he becomes physically incapable of functioning. His intellect told him that morality was just a social construct, an arbitrary set of rules invented by weak people to control the strong. He believed that if he didn't care about the law, The law couldn't touch his mind. But Dostoevsky demonstrates that the moral law is not an external software package installed by society. It is hardwired directly into the human hardware. You can try to think your way out of it all day, but your subconscious will rebel. Raskolnikov didn't just kill 2 women in that apartment. He killed his own connection to reality. The moment he stepped over that line, he severed his relationship with the human family. He can no longer talk to his mother. He can no longer embrace his sister. And he can no longer look his friend in the eye. Every casual conversation becomes an existential minefield. His grand arrogance has succeeded in making him extraordinary, but not in the way he wanted. He is not elevated above humanity like Napoleon. He is isolated from humanity like a rabid animal trapped in a cage of his own making. The paranoia of the monomaniac. As the days turn into weeks, Raskolnikov enters the agonizing psychological hell of monomania, a state of mind where the consciousness becomes entirely consumed by a single obsessive idea. For Raskolnikov, that idea is his own detection. Every word spoken by a stranger, every glance from a passerby on the street, every newspaper headline becomes a coded message about his crime. When his friend Razumikin mentions the murder in casual conversation, Raskolnikov's blood runs cold. When he is summoned to the police station for a completely unrelated matter, a trivial dispute over his unpaid rent, he faints from sheer psychological exhaustion the moment he hears the detectives discussing the case in the next room. This is the ultimate irony of narcissism. The narcissistic mind believes it is the center of the universe. When Raskolnikov was planning the crime, this grandiosity made him feel powerful. But now, in the aftermath of the murder, that same grandiosity turns against him, because he believes he is the center of the universe. He assumes that everyone is watching him, everyone is analyzing him, and everyone knows his secret. His mind transforms St. Petersburg from a bustling city into a hyper-coordinated trap designed specifically to expose him. He hides the stolen trinkets under a random stone in a courtyard, never even counting the money or utilizing the resource he supposedly committed the murder to obtain. The rationalization of doing good deeds with the wealth evaporates instantly. The crime becomes entirely hollow, stripped of all its intellectual justification, leaving behind nothing but raw, bleeding terror. Dostoevsky shows us that the worst punishment for a crime is not the prison cell, the whip, or the executioner's axe. The worst punishment is the absolute loss of peace. Raskolnikov is trapped in a permanent state of psychological hypervigilance. His brain is locked in a fight-or-flight response that never shuts off. He cannot rest, he cannot think clearly, and he cannot escape himself. His own mind has become his chief interrogator, torturing him with a relentless stream of worst-case scenarios, doubts, and self-loathing. The psychological cat-and-mouse game, the psychological pressure cooker, reaches an absolute boiling point when Raskolnikov meets Porfiry Petrovich, the brilliant investigator assigned to the murder case. Porfiry is not a conventional detective. He doesn't rely on physical evidence, fingerprints, or eyewitness accounts. Instead, he understands the volatile mechanics of the guilty mind. Porfiry has read Raskolnikov's article about the extraordinary man. He recognizes the dangerous psychological profile immediately. When Raskolnikov visits the police station, Porfiry engages him in a series of deeply unsettling philosophical conversations. He plays a masterful game of psychological cat and mouse, treating Raskolnikov not as a suspect, but as an intellectual equal. Porfiry explicitly tells Raskolnikov how he operates. He explains that if he arrests a suspect too early, he gives them a solid wall to push back against. But if he leaves them entirely alone, if he lets them wander around the city free, suspected but uncharged, their own anxiety will eventually destroy them. They will get caught in their own web of overthinking. They will return to the scene of the crime. They will drop Freudian slips, and eventually, their own conscience will drive them straight into his arms. Porfiry describes the guilty man as a moth fluttering around a candle no matter how hard he tries to fly away. The light of his own guilt will inevitably draw him back to the flame. Raskolnikov's narcissistic ego is completely unraveled by this strategy. He doesn't know if Porfiry actually knows the truth, or if he is just fishing. The ambiguity is paralyzing. Raskolnikov swings wildly between arrogant defiance and complete panic. He screams at Porfiry, demanding that he either accuse him formally or leave him alone, completely exposing his raw nerves. This dynamic reveals a profound psychological truth. A narcissist cannot handle being read. Raskolnikov's entire identity is built on the belief that he is deeper, smarter, and more complex than ordinary people. When Porfiry looks right through his philosophical mask and sees the scared, desperate, trembling boy underneath, Raskolnikov's psychic defenses collapse. His intellect, which he thought was his greatest weapon, becomes completely useless against a man who simply understands human nature, the shadow self and the double. To deepen the psychological diagnosis of Raskolnikov, Dostoevsky introduces a dark psychological double, Arkady Svidrigailov. Svidrigailov is an older, wealthy, completely unprincipled nobleman who has actually achieved the state of mind that Raskolnikov only fantasized about. He is a genuine nihilist. He has stepped over blood, crossed moral boundaries, committed depraved acts, and feels absolutely zero remorse. Svidrigailov represents Raskolnikov's theory brought to life. He is the true extraordinary man who can commit crimes without a somatic rebellion, without a fever, and without an existential crisis. But when Raskolnikov interacts with Svidrigailov, he doesn't feel admiration. He feels a deep, instinctive revulsion. In Svidrigailov, Raskolnikov sees the grotesque reality of pure ego. Without a moral anchor, freedom doesn't look like Napoleon conquering Europe. It looks like a bored, dead-eyed predator wandering through life, looking for the next cheap thrill to stimulate his numb senses. Svidrigailov confesses to Raskolnikov that his vision of eternity is not some grand, celestial paradise or a historical monument. Instead, he imagines eternity as a small, dusty, rural bathhouse, filled with spiders in every corner. This is one of the most chilling psychological metaphors in literature. The ultimate destination of pure egoism is not infinite expansion, but infinite confinement. When you reject all human connection and all moral responsibility, the universe shrinks until you are locked inside a filthy room with nothing but your own rot. Svidrigailov's story ends in complete psychological bankruptcy. Having exhausted all pleasures, all crimes, and all manipulations, he experiences a total void of meaning. He walks out onto a misty street, Petersburg Street, and shoots himself in the head. Through Svidrigailov's suicide, Dostoevsky delivers a fatal blow to Raskolnikov's ideology, the path of the absolute individualist. The man who successfully detaches himself from all human empathy leads straight to the grave of meaninglessness. Redemption through vulnerability. If Svidrigailov is Raskolnikov's dark shadow, then Sonya Marmeladova is his saving light. Sonya is a young woman who has also stepped over a boundary. To save her starving siblings and her alcoholic father, she has been forced to sell her body on the streets. By the standards of society, Sonya is a fallen woman, a sinner, an outcast. But psychologically and spiritually, she is the exact opposite of Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov sacrificed other people's lives for his own ego. Sonya sacrifices her own body and dignity for the survival of others. Raskolnikov's crime was driven by pride. Sonya's actions are driven by radical, self-sacrificing love. Driven by a desperate need for confession, Raskolnikov goes to Sonya's miserable room. He is drawn to her because he senses that they are both outcasts who have crossed the line. But when he tries to explain his grand philosophical theory to her, when he tries to explain that he killed the pawnbroker because he wanted to be a Napoleon, Sonya looks at him not with condemnation, but with a profound, earth-shattering pity. She doesn't engage with his intellectual rationalizations. She cuts straight through the egoism and says, "What have you done to yourself?" Sonya realizes that the true victim of Raskolnikov's crime is Raskolnikov himself. She tells him that his soul is suffocating, and that he must go to the crossroads of the city, bow down, kiss the earth he has defiled, and openly declare to the world, "I have murdered." This is the antidote to grandiose narcissism, radical humility, and absolute vulnerability. To heal, Raskolnikov must dismantle the magnificent tower of his ego. He must admit that he is not extraordinary. He must admit that he is not a Napoleon. He must accept that he is just a broken, vulnerable human being who needs help, mercy, and connection, like everyone else. It takes a long, agonizing time for Raskolnikov to surrender. Even when he finally walks into the police station and confesses to the crime, his pride is still fighting for its life. He confesses because he cannot handle the psychological stress any longer, but in his mind, he still believes his theory was right. He just blames himself for being too weak to carry it out. He goes to Siberia to serve a sentence of hard labor, still wrapped in the cold armor of his intellect. The awakening of the real. The true psychological resurrection of Raskolnikov occurs only when he hits absolute rock bottom in the Siberian prison camps. For the first year, he is hated by his fellow inmates. The ordinary peasant prisoners see right through his educated, upper-class arrogance. They recognize him as an egoist, a man who looks down on them, and they treat him with open hostility. It is only when Sonia follows him to Siberia, setting up a life outside the prison walls just to visit him, that the final psychological breakthrough happens. Raskolnikov falls terribly ill inside the prison, not from the physical labor, but from the lingering rot of his own pride. During this sickness, he has a prophetic dream that serves as the ultimate critique of his own philosophy. He dreams of a worldwide plague caused by a mysterious new microscopic creature that possesses intelligence and will. People infected by these creatures instantly believe that they, and they alone, possess the absolute, unquestionable truth. Entire societies become infected. Everyone believes they are the only extraordinary ones. As a result, all communication breaks down. People cannot agree on what is right or wrong, what is good or evil. Everyone judges everyone else, and no one can understand each other. Out of pure intellectual arrogance, human beings begin slaughtering one another in a chaotic, global civil war until the entire race faces extinction. This dream is Dostoevsky's terrifying prophecy of what happens when individual egoism replaces objective, moral truth. It is a description of a world where everyone has adopted Raskolnikov's theory, a world of infinite Napoleons, which is to say, a world of infinite monsters. When Raskolnikov wakes up from this nightmare, he looks out the window and sees Sonia standing by the river. In that quiet, unassuming moment, something snaps inside his brain. The grand, heavy, complex machinery of his intellect completely gives way to a rush of pure, unadulterated emotion. He throws himself at Sonia's feet, weeping, embracing her knees. For the first time in his life, he has stopped thinking, and he has started living. He has traded the cold, dead perfection of his theory for the messy, warm, painful reality of genuine love. Dostoevsky concludes the narrative by stating that a new life is beginning for Raskolnikov, but it will require a long, difficult struggle of gradual regeneration. The basement of self-sabotage and the tower of grandiose narcissism have both been demolished. Raskolnikov has finally stepped out of the prison of his mind and entered the real world, a world where we are not meant to be masters over one another, but caretakers of each other's souls. The toxic cult of empathy. If you look at modern pop psychology, corporate leadership seminars, and self-help culture, you will find one word elevated above all others: empathy. We are constantly told that the world's problems would disappear if we just had more empathy. We are instructed to be completely vulnerable, to hold space for everyone's trauma, and to operate with boundless, unconditional compassion. We treat empathy as if it is a magical, harmless cure-all for the human condition. But Fyodor Dostoevsky recognized a dark, terrifying truth about human nature that we are still too uncomfortable to admit. Empathy without boundaries is not a virtue. It is a psychological weapon of mass destruction. In his novel The Idiot, Dostoevsky conducts one of the most brutal psychological thought experiments in the history of literature. He asks a simple question: what would actually happen if a truly perfect, completely selfless, endlessly empathetic man was dropped into the middle of modern society? The answer is horrifying. He wouldn't save anyone. He would destroy himself, and he would leave a trail of ruined lives, madness, and dead bodies in his wake. Dostoevsky introduces us to Prince Lev Nikolaevich Mishkin. Mishkin is returning to Russia after spending years in a Swiss sanatorium being treated for epilepsy. He is a man who possesses absolutely no ego, no malice, no pride, and no hidden agenda. He cannot tell a lie. He cannot manipulate. He looks at every single person, whether they are a beggar, a thief, or a wealthy aristocrat, with the exact same unconditional love. He is a secular Christ figure. To the cynical, status-obsessed society of Street Petersburg, Mishkin is an anomaly. At first, they mock him. They call him an idiot because he lacks the basic social armor that normal adults use to protect themselves. But very quickly, their mockery turns into an intense, gravitational obsession. Because Mishkin has no defenses, people are inexplicably drawn to him. They confess their darkest secrets to him. They desperately seek his approval. But Dostoevsky is about to spring the trap. He shows us that Mishkin's absolute goodness is not a healing force. It is a psychological vacuum. Because Mishkin refuses to judge anyone, because he refuses to draw a line in the sand and defend his own boundaries, he creates an environment of total moral chaos. The danger of a missing shadow. In the analytical psychology of Carl Jung, there is a concept called the shadow. The shadow is the dark, aggressive, selfish part of the human psyche. It is the part of you that knows how to fight, how to say no, and how to protect your own interests. Modern society teaches us to repress the shadow, to pretend we are perfectly nice and harmless. But Jung warned that a person without a shadow is incredibly dangerous, because without that aggressive energy, you have no spine. You have no boundaries. Prince Mishkin has no shadow. He is pure, blinding light. And because he is pure light, he has absolutely no psychological immune system. When you have no boundaries, you cannot prioritize. If you love everyone equally, you actually love no one specifically. This is the fatal flaw of radical empathy. In the real world, adult relationships require choice. They require you to value your partner, your family, or your friends above strangers. But Mishkin cannot do this. He is just as deeply affected by the suffering of a random drunk on the street as he is by the suffering of the woman he intends to marry. This inability to choose, this pathological need to soothe everyone's pain all at once, leads directly into a catastrophic love triangle. Mishkin finds himself torn between two women, Aglaya Epanchin and Nastasia Filipovna. Aglaya is a beautiful, fiery, proud young woman from a respectable family. She falls in love with Mishkin because she sees his purity. She wants him to be a hero. She wants him to stand up, claim her, and be a traditional partner. But then there is Nastasia Filipovna. Nastasia is one of the most complex, psychologically damaged characters ever written. Orphaned at a young age, she was groomed and exploited by an older, wealthy aristocrat. She is a victim of profound trauma, and as a result, she carries a crushing, unbearable sense of shame. She believes she is ruined, dirty, and unworthy of love. When Mishkin looks at Nastasia, he does not feel romantic passion. He feels an overwhelming, desperate, infinite pity. He looks at her and sees a tortured soul that needs to be saved. He publicly proposes to her, not because he desires her, but because he wants to rescue her from her own shame. The destructive nature of pity. This brings us to one of Dostoevsky's most piercing psychological insights, the lethal difference between love and pity. We often confuse pity with compassion, but they are fundamentally different. Love is a relationship between equals. When you love someone, you respect their agency, you see their strength, and you hold them accountable. Pity, on the other hand, is inherently hierarchical. When you pity someone, you are looking down on them. You are treating them as a helpless victim who cannot survive without your intervention. Mishkin thinks his pity is a gift, but for a trauma survivor like Nastasia, his pity is pure psychological poison. Nastasia desperately craves redemption, but she is utterly terrified of Mishkin's pure goodness. Why? Because when you hate yourself, being in the presence of someone who is morally perfect feels like a spotlight shining on your deepest flaws. Mishkin's absolute innocence is a constant, agonizing reminder to Nastasia of everything she has lost and everything she can never be. Furthermore, Nastasia is smart enough to realize that Mishkin doesn't love her as a woman. He loves her as a project. He loves his own feeling of self-sacrificing nobility. His pity strips her of her dignity. It turns her into a wounded bird. So, what does Nastasia do? She runs away from the saint and throws herself into the arms of a monster. She runs to Parfyon Rogojin, a dark, violent, dangerously obsessed man who represents pure, unchecked passion. Rogojin does not pity Nastasia. He desires her. He wants to possess her, even if it destroys them both. From a logical standpoint, Nastasia's decision to leave a gentle, perfect man for a violent, unstable man makes no sense. But from a psychological standpoint, it is entirely predictable. Nastasia chooses Rogojin because his darkness matches her own internal darkness. With Rogojin, she doesn't have to pretend to be pure. She doesn't have to feel the crushing weight of a saint's pity. Rogozhin treats her like a human being, a flawed, chaotic, flesh-and-blood human being. She would rather be destroyed by a man who desires her than be suffocated by a man who merely pities her. The Messiah complex and the failure to act. Myshkin suffers from a terminal case of the savior complex. He believes that if he just suffers enough, if he just absorbs enough of everyone else's pain, he can heal the world around him. But you cannot save someone who does not want to be saved, and you cannot fix trauma simply by offering yourself up as an emotional punching bag. The climax of this psychological disaster occurs when Myshkin is forced into a room with both Aglaya and Nastasia. It is the ultimate standoff. Aglaya, the proud, healthy woman who wants to build a real life with him, demands that he choose. She verbally attacks Nastasia, calling her out on her manipulative, dramatic behavior. Nastasia, deeply wounded and terrified, challenges Myshkin. She demands that he prove his devotion to her right then and there. This is the moment where a healthy adult psychology is required. A functional man would recognize that Nastasia is spiraling, but he would also recognize his commitment to Aglaya. He would draw a boundary. He would say no. But Myshkin has no boundaries. When he sees Nastasia's face twist in agony, his radical empathy completely short-circuits his brain. He cannot bear to see her suffer. He hesitates. He turns to Nastasia, driven by blind pity, and in that single moment of hesitation, he destroys everything. Aglaya realizes that he will never truly be hers, that he will always be a slave to whoever is suffering the most in the room. She runs out in despair, her life completely derailed. And Nastasia, even after Myshkin abandons Aglaya for her, she cannot tolerate his terrifying purity. On the day of their wedding, she runs away yet again, fleeing back to the violent Rogozhin. By refusing to choose sides, by trying to save everyone, Myshkin ends up betraying everyone. His lack of a structured ego creates a black hole of uncertainty that tears both women apart. The collapse of the unanchored mind. Dostoevsky is painting a grim reality about the architecture of human sanity. Sanity is not just the ability to think clearly, it is the ability to filter out the noise of the world. A healthy mind has walls. It has doors that can be locked. If you feel the pain of every single person on earth as if it were your own, your nervous system will simply burn out. Myshkin and the violent Rogozhin are actually two halves of a complete human psyche that have been tragically split apart. Rogozhin is all shadow, pure aggression, desire, and survival instinct, with no empathy or moral restraint. Myshkin is all light, pure empathy, compassion, and spirituality, with no aggression or survival instinct. Without the light, the shadow becomes a murderer. But without the shadow, the light becomes a helpless victim. The story ends in absolute tragedy. Nastasia's deeply ingrained self-hatred, combined with the chaotic dynamic between the two men, reaches its inevitable conclusion. Rogozhin murders Nastasia. He stabs her to death in his dark, gloomy house. When Myshkin finally finds them, he does not react with righteous anger. He does not call the police. He does not seek justice. Instead, he lies down next to the murderer, strokes Rogozhin's hair, and comforts him as they sit beside the rotting corpse of the woman they both loved. In this final, haunting scene, Myshkin's mind completely shatters. The weight of the trauma, the absolute failure of his radical empathy to save the world, destroys his fragile psychology. He suffers a total mental collapse and reverts to a state of complete, silent idiocy, and is shipped back to the sanatorium in Switzerland. The verdict on absolute goodness. What is Dostoevsky trying to tell us with this devastating autopsy of a saint? He is telling us that true morality in a fallen, cynical world requires strength. You cannot be genuinely good unless you also have the capacity for danger. If you are harmless, if you are simply incapable of saying no, your goodness means nothing. It is just weakness masquerading as virtue. We live in a culture that encourages emotional enmeshment. We are told to take on the burdens of our friends, our partners, and the entire political landscape. We are made to feel guilty if we ever prioritize our own peace of mind over the suffering of others. But the idiot serves as a glaring red warning light against this way of living. If you try to operate in this world with no armor, the world will not reward you for your purity. It will chew you up, exploit your kindness, and spit you out broken. To be a functional adult, you must integrate your shadow. You must learn the psychological art of the boundary. You must be able to look at someone you deeply care about, someone who is destroying their own life, and have the strength to say, "I love you, but I will not let you drag me down with you." You must accept that you are not a messiah. You cannot save people from their own choices. And if you try to absorb their pain, you will not heal them. You will only drown alongside them. Mishkin's tragedy is that he was too beautiful for the reality of human nature. He tried to love the world perfectly, and the world crushed his mind into dust. Dostoevsky leaves us with a chilling realization. An ego is not an evil thing to be destroyed. It is the very vessel that keeps us sane, grounded, and alive in a world that thrives on chaos.